In this video, we're going to cover one of the exciting new features of the model view in Power BI, calculation groups. Now, calculation groups in Power BI provide a way to simplify measure management by grouping common calculations into a single table structure, which reduces the total number of measures that are needed within your data model. Now, commonly, calculation groups are used with time intelligence calculations, currency conversion, scenario analysis, and dynamic measures. We're going to focus on time intelligence in this video, but if you're interested in exploring additional use cases and scenarios, it's definitely worth checking out some of these other common scenarios. So setting up calculation groups is pretty straightforward, and they can actually be created in desktop or service. So from a high level, there are two main components. We've got calculation groups and calculation items. Now, first up, you have calculation groups, which is really just a collection of calculation items. So instead of creating multiple measures for calculations like year to date, quarter to date, month to date, year over year, same period last year, etc. So instead of having to create all of the time intelligence versions for each of those measures, you can create a single calculation group and then define the items that belong to each group. The other component are calculation items, which are used to define the specific calculations within a calculation group. So each calculation item represents a specific calculation or variation of a calculation, and then are applied to the explicit measure to alter that measure's calculation. We'll dig into exactly what this means in the demo, but one of the really important pieces to note here is that when you first enable or first create a calculation group, you'll get this notification that implicit measures are discouraged. And the reason is that calculation groups and items only work with measures that are explicitly defined. So this is really a great opportunity to reinforce Power BI best practices and create explicit measures against the data model. So once we have our calculation groups defined and the calculation items added, we can now use these calculation groups in our visuals where it makes sense. So let's take a look at an example of a matrix visual that is built out with uniquely created specific measures. So as you can see here, we have a base measure for total revenue, and we've also built out 5 additional explicit time intelligence measures, all based on revenue. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with this approach, but as you continue to add more base measures like total profit, total orders, we've got total revenue here, so on and so forth, you're required to create new, unique time intelligence functions for each base measure. So needless to say, this really starts to clutter the measures view, and it can create a lot of individual measures. In our second view here, we've removed all of those individual unique measures and have added in our time intelligence calculation group. So what this allows us to do is to add that same total revenue base measure, but instead of adding 5 unique measures, we're only adding in a single calculation group. And despite the header naming conventions being slightly different, the values are identical. What's really exciting here is that we can actually add in a field parameter that contains a bunch of different measures, and then use that parameter to dynamically update the base value within the matrix or the visual within that calculation group. So it's seriously cool, and we'll actually end up doing this as part of our report page toward the end of this demo. All right, let's head over to Power BI, and we're going to build out our calculation group. All right, so I've already built out a matrix visual here where we are looking at our category name. So we've got mountain bikes and road bikes. I've added in a date hierarchy from the calendar lookup table. So we have 2022 for January, February, March, April, May, right? So we're basically looking at 2022, the first 6 months of the year. And then I have added in a bunch of different measures. So like I said, I've got my total revenue base measure. And then I've also built out these 5 revenue-specific time intelligence measures, right? So previous month revenue, total revenue month over month, percent change, total revenue month over month, quarter to date, and year to date. right? So this is the formula that you would need to follow if you wanted to create the same version for things like profit or sales or order volume or bulk orders or whatever the case is. So what we want to do with our calculation group is clean all of this up. So in order to start building out calculation groups, the easiest way that I found is heading over to the model view here. And you can see within the data model view, we have tables, and then the model view, we have this little calculation group option here. So from here, we could right click on the more options menu and define a new calculation group. That's one way we could tackle this. The other option is to come up here to our ribbon and create a new calculation group from the ribbon menu. Either way, you're going to end up in the exact same spot. All right, so a couple of things to notice here. All right, if we look at our calculation group, all right, we see that we have a 1 next to here. So we've started to create a placeholder for our first calculation group. It's just named calculation group, so it's going to be important to update the name here. And we've also started to create the structure for calculation items. And you can see here that we have our first calculation item that's been defined, and it uses this DAX function called selected measure. And what selected measure does is it's just an expression that is designed specifically for calculation items and dynamic format strings to reference the measure that is within the context. So by within the context, what they mean is that when you add a explicitly defined measure to a visual, that is the current measure within the context. So any calculation items that are built out are then going to be applied to that measure within the context. All right, so for our first calculation item, we're going to update this, and I'm going to call this current measure. Current measure. All right, so this is always just going to be the version of the measure that is within the context. So we'll hit enter to lock this in, and we'll see this calculation item name update to current measure. That looks great. You can actually see it here as well within the properties pane. Now, if we come up to the calculation group and click on this, we can update the naming convention used for this calculation group. So let's call this something like time intelligence. Again, you can add in your description, synonyms, all sorts of stuff. So now we have our time intelligence calculation group, and we've started to define our calculation items. So from here, we can click on calculation item, and again, you have this more options menu where you can hide, collapse, expand, or add new calculation items. When you click on this header in the property pane, this brings up the option to add a new calculation item here as well. So let's go through and start building out some of our other calculation items. All right, so up first, let's build out a calculation item to calculate previous month. So we'll call this previous month. And here we're going to use our calculate statement. So we want to calculate the value of the selected measure. We want to do that in a modified filter context. We're going to do date add in a modified filter context where we're going to shift the calendar lookup dates right here back 1 month. All right, that's our period. All right, so this is exactly how we would build out any other previous month measure, but instead of referencing a specific measure or formula here within the expression of the calculate statement, all we're doing is we're referencing the selected measure value. Again, that's the important piece to understand here, is that it's whatever that the measure is in the context of the visual is going to be selected and applied for this calculation. All right, so we've got our current measure as our base, previous month. Let's add in a new calculation item for quarter to date and year to date. All right, so this is going to be quarter to date equals same start here with calculate and then selected measure. And here we'll use our dates quarter to date function with the date column from our calendar lookup table. All right, and I'm going to copy this. And I'm copying this because I'm going to update this for year to date. It's basically the same exact format, just with instead of dates QTD, it's dates YTD. So we'll make that update real quick. Add new item. We'll paste. And then update our name and our function, dates YTD. And we'll lock this in. All right, perfect. So there's two more calculation items that I want to add in, one for month over month and then another for month over month percent change. So let's start off with our month over month value. And I'm going to use some variables as part of this just to kind of clean it up and make it readable. So we're going to start off with our kind of current value. And this is just going to equal the selected measure. The next thing that we want to do is we want to define the previous value. And here, we're basically going to calculate our last month's version of the selected measure. So again, we'll start off with our calculate, and then we're going to use the selected measure, our date add function. And again, we're going to take our calendar date field, and we're going to shift our dates back 1 month. All right, and then here for our return, we basically just want to subtract the current value from the previous value. Awesome. We'll lock this in. Sweet. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we'll create a item for month over month percent change. And this is going to be month over month percent change. And just using Alt and 30 on the keyboard to go through and define that delta symbol. But you can make that whatever you want. All right, so again, here we're going to start off, we're going to create a couple of variables for our current value. Again, this is going to equal the selected measure. We want to define our previous value. Again, we're going to calculate the selected value. Selected measure. Where our date add, right? We want to shift our dates back 1 month. Close that out. All right, and then same thing, we want to create our variable here for the difference of these two values. So basically we're just redefining that month over month value. Again, we could have copied and pasted this and updated it, but it never hurts to work through the DAX. Current value minus previous value. And then return, we'll use the divide function. And then we're going to divide our difference value from previous value to get the month over month change. Awesome. All right, so we've got everything defined. Let's head over to our report view, and I want to build out a new visual. So let's use our visual here as a base, and I'm going to copy and paste this just to duplicate it. And then I'm just going to shrink this top one to give us a little bit of space to work with here. All right. And I'll come in and I actually want to remove all of these values. So revenue on all of the time intelligence ones that we built out. All right, so now we're basically stuck or left with this blank canvas. So what I need to do here is add in my base value. So let's use our same example, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to add in total revenue. So now we're seeing our subcategories, mountain bikes and road bikes, for this first 6 months of 2022, and we have our total revenue. And if you look at the matrix, I know it's shrunk down a little bit above, but you can see that we have 3.3 million for total revenue for mountain bikes, and the total grand totals are the exact same. So far so good. Everything's exactly the same. What's really cool here is that if we come into columns, we can add in our time intelligence calculation group to columns. All of our items are added by default into this visual, right? So we have our month over month revenue. And if you look month over month to month over month, these values line up. If you look at previous month revenue and previous month revenue, all of these values align. Same thing with quarter to date and year to date. So without having to add in all of those additional time intelligence measures to this visual, we were able to define it and just add in that calculation group. So a couple of things here that are kind of bothering me a little bit. First thing is the order, right? I'd like to be in that same exact order. The other thing is the formatting on the month over month percent change, right? This is showing up as dollars. I'd like to see this as a percentage. What's cool about the calculation groups is that when you're referencing the base measure, these different values take into consideration the explicit version of that measure, how it's formatted, and the data type within the model. So kind of inherits that, which is why we're seeing these dollar amounts here for revenue. So let's jump back over to the model. And I want to take care of a couple of things. First, the ordering, and then I want to define the using this dynamic formatting string, how we're going to format the month over month percent change measure. So if we click on our calculation item header, what's really cool here is this is all drag and drop. So let's say we just want current measure, previous month, maybe month over month change, month over month percent change, quarter to date, and then year to date. All right, so pretty happy with that order. The next thing that we can do is if we click on this calculation item and then toggle on dynamic format string. And there's a bunch of different documentation and help center articles around how to create dynamic formatting strings. There's different ways that you can approach different types of calculations and all that kind of stuff. So depending on what you're trying to solve for here, your solution may look a little bit different than mine. But very simply, what we want to do is we're going to use a pound sign and then a decimal point and a pound sign and then a percent sign, right? So basically we're saying, hey, we've got two placeholders in front of the decimal, and then we're going to have our accuracy to the hundreds place behind the decimal. So it's pretty straightforward there. You can expand this to include, larger values here, larger percentages, like if you're getting into the thousands place, stuff like that. And then from here, let's jump back over to our report view. And we can now see that our measures are all in the same exact order, top to bottom, and our format for our percentages updated appropriately. All right, so everything's looking really, really good here. If we wanted to at this point, we could actually go through and delete all of these different measures, right? We could remove these from the model. We don't need them anymore unless we want to use these specifically for other calculations or something like that. But again, it's a great way to go through and kind of clean up a lot of the clutter within your model if it exists. I'm going to remove this top visual here for a moment. And the last thing that I want to kind of talk about, and I had hinted at this in the slides, is that we can actually create a brand new field parameter to toggle this current or base measure. So let's go through and quickly set that up. So we're going to come up to modeling, new parameter, new field parameter, and I would like to call this measure selector. And all we need to do is add in the different measures that we want to add in here. So I'm going to add in total cost, total revenue. Let's add in total profit, total orders, and then how about like quantities sold? And I'll click create. So Power BI has automatically added this parameter in as a slicer. And when I select the different values within the slicer, X out of that, see nothing happens with my visual, right? Nothing's updating or changing. Because what I need to do is I actually need to reference this parameter within my values section of the visual. So what we want to do is pull out this total revenue and update it with the measure selector. So now look what happens. We've got total orders here. You want quantity sold as your base measure. That'll update. Total profit, total revenue, total cost. Again, it's amazing that you're able to now update a couple of values within your matrix tool with a combination of something like this field parameter and your time intelligence calculation group. You're really creating a very dynamic visual here that can help users and different team members explore exactly what's going on. So, all right, so at this point, I think you're getting the idea of just how useful and powerful calculation groups can be within Power BI. And what's really cool is that with all of the Power BI team's continued product development and the evolution of calculation groups and items and visuals, all of this can be created from desktop or within the service environment. So you got a bunch of different flexibility there as well. All right, so have fun, explore this more on your own, and try out some of the other use cases for calculation groups. I'll see you in the next lecture. Until then, learn on.